I released my book, When God Lost an Election, many people have wondered, how and when did God lose an election? Which election did he contest? So that is the subject matter of this virtual hangout. When did God lose an election?
Since you love to read, you will be free forever.
Terry Mante is a great person to get content and deep revelation with both biblical insight and socio-economic thought.
Terry is someone who is very dedicated and committed.
Terry is an incisive author.
Nobody becomes successful by using their weaknesses, and we have to be conscious about using our strengths to mitigate the impact of our weaknesses on our lives. Leadership is a sense, it's a certain mindset, it's a certain understanding, a certain paradigm that you have, which translates into influence, into making an impact, into having a positive impact on the lives of other people.
Terry is a terrific writer.
Terry's books are not only relevant for the development of potential and capacity, they are also essential for the refinement of ethics and character.
Everybody needs a Terry Mante book. Get them from reputable online stores and libraries. Connect with us by phone, email, or social media.
In the Bible, the nation of Israel was reputed as God's own country. So God led Israel himself, unlike the other nations where they had human kings. And when God was leading Israel, he led them, he did a lot of things for them. And so in our modern governance structures, God would probably be seen as a president of Israel at that time when he was leading them. And I want us to just look at some of the features of God's presidency. I've outlined some of the features of God as president of Israel when he was leading Israel. The first matter that was a feature was the matter of sovereignty. Sovereignty, which is the supreme power and authority to govern a people. In the context of God serving as president of Israel, sovereignty was in him. He was the source and final authority in the nation. Because of that, during the period when he was in office, he didn't need to run for elections because he had the authority to govern. He had sovereignty. He appointed all the leaders and placed them at the helm of affairs. Every law originated from him. All officials of state were his representatives with the mandate to carry out his agenda. They were not necessarily the representatives of the people. The Israelites were his people, and he was their self-existing ruler. That is sovereignty in the presidency of God in biblical Israel. Let's also look at the matter of the rule of law. A system where rule of law prevails is one where arbitrary power is restricted and placed under well-defined laws. The laws are applied fairly without fear, favor, or prejudice. In President God's regime, rule of law was the order of the day, as he was ruthlessly impartial in adjudication and enforcement of his laws. There was an instance when his prime minister, Moses, who was the first leader of Israel, the first prime minister of Israel. God was president, but he normally governed through human intermediaries who, in the context of Israel at the time, were called prophets or judges. But in relating it to our contemporary governance structures, I have taken the liberty to refer to such people as the prime minister, but they carried out instructions from God. While the people were on a journey from Egypt to the promised land, they were being led from Egypt to the promised land. And there was a time when they needed water to drink, and so Moses made an appeal to God, and God told Moses specifically to speak to the rock, and the rock will yield water. Instead of speaking to the rock, Moses rather went and he went and struck the rock with his rod, the rod he had in his hand. And when he did that, he got the result. Water came out all right, because this was something that had happened before. But in this instance, God wanted to change the methodology. But Moses decided to go by the old approach that he was familiar with, instead of going by the new approach that God had instructed him to use. When he did that, because he did that, God decided to punish him. And God told him that because he had done that, he was not going to go with the people to the promised land. This was Moses, the leader who had led the people, who had done so much and done the works of God and magnified God in the eyes of the people. Yet when he broke the law, God did not look at him with favor. God punished him. So even in that, under that system, where Moses was very close to God and often spoke to God and delivered his instructions to the people and did a lot of work for God, when he breached the law, God was impartial. God effected the right punishments. That system of fairness in President God's regime remains the pursuit of many nations today. In Ghana's constitution, for example, Article 17 Clause 1 provides that all persons shall be equal before the law. Clause 2 of the same Article 17 even further clarifies that a person shall not be discriminated against on grounds of gender, race, color, ethnic origin, religion, creed, or socio-economic status. And we find also that constitutions and legal arrangements of many nations contain same or similar provisions. It is interesting to observe that long before nations embraced these principles, God was already enforcing them in the country he served as president of. That is for the rule of law. Now let's look at infrastructure and social services. Can you imagine living in a country where there is no observable wear and tear or depreciation of infrastructure and assets? That this happens because the government is so conscientious that it provides first-class infrastructure and social services and is able to maintain, replace, or repair all national assets even before decay sets in. In an address to the nation, Prime Minister Moses prompted the people, and I'm quoting what Moses told the people in this particular address. For 40 years, I led you through the wilderness, yet your clothes and sandals did not wear out. You ate no bread and drank no wine or other alcoholic drink, but God provided for you, so you would know that He is the Lord your God. Unquote. And so it is worthy to note that while they were going through, God provided for the people and nothing happened to them. They were protected and they were kept safe. Moses also told the people that God went ahead of them. He guided them during the day with a pillar of cloud, and He provided lights at night. So this allowed them to travel by day or by night. And the Lord did not remove the cloud or the pillar of fire from its place in front of the people. The people had everything they needed because of the benevolence of their leader. Infrastructure, food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, and everything needed to support human survival at that time was taken care of by President God. Defense and security, which is also another important feature of any nation state. Under Israel, under the presidency of God in Israel, the cloud and the pillar of fire shielded the people from the adverse effects of the elements of the weather. As they traveled across the desert from Egypt through the Middle East, the cloud was their defense against the scorching sun during the day, while the fire offered both light and warmth at night. They were also adequately fortified against attacks by neighboring countries, and that was evidenced when they sent some spies to the promised land, and they met an indigent of the land, and the indigent of the promised land told them that everybody in the country they were trying to enter had heard about them, and the fear of them had fallen on them, and so everybody is terrified that the Israelites would come, because they had heard how God had defended them and God had protected them against attacks from their colonial masters or their slave masters, Egypt. So this is how God led the people. Whether it's got to do with the authority to reign, he had absolute authority to govern, that is the sovereignty. Rule of law was enforced without fear or favor. There was rule of law. Infrastructure and social services were also adequate for the survival of the people. Defense and security was also very important, and it was well taken care of by President God, and the people were safe and all that. One would wonder, if you live in a country like this where the government is so effective and efficient and dutiful, what else would you ask for? But in the case of Israel, a time came when they said that they no longer wanted God to be their president. They wanted somebody to lead them, a human king. They didn't want God, an invisible God, to lead them who is doing all these things. Regardless of all the good things God did, the people said that they wanted God out of the picture, and they wanted a new person to be their president. God did not approve of it, but the people insisted that that is what they wanted. And because of that, because their will was strong, God decided to step down for a new king to take over the presidency of Israel. The question I have, and as I ponder over this scenario, what I think about is that if God himself as leader in a theocracy was removed and replaced by the people's preferred king, you think that he chooses leaders of democratic nations? If God could not, or let me rather say did not, resist the people's persistent desire for a human king, to what extent can contemporary African leaders govern against the wishes of their citizens? It's been my pleasure hanging out with you today. Before I go, I would like to recommend to you my book, this book, When God Lost an Election, The Political Market of Demand and Supply. This book is available globally on all reputable online stores and libraries. Get it, read it, and recommend to someone close to you. This is Terry Mante. See you next time.
Once you love to read, you will be free forever.
Terry Mante is a great person to get content and deep revelation with both biblical insight and socio-economic thought.
Terry is someone who is very dedicated and committed.
Terry is an incisive author.
Nobody becomes successful by using their weaknesses, and we have to be conscious about using our strengths to mitigate the impact of our weaknesses on our lives. Leadership is a sense. It's a certain mindset, it's a certain understanding, a certain paradigm that you have, which translates into influence, into making an impact, into having a positive impact on the lives of other people.
Terry is a terrific writer.
Terry's books are not only relevant for the development of potential and capacity, they are also essential for the refinement of ethics and character.
Everybody needs a Terry Monte book. Get them from reputable online stores and libraries. Connect with us by phone, email, or social media.